Faster Mai, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. Through till 1, it's the Environment, Food and Agriculture Ministry on today with Minister Clare Barber. MHK, one of the Douglas East MHK, Scott Gallacher is Chief Officer. So we'll find out exactly. If you've got any questions, by the way, text, email, call and WhatsApp. Call 66 13 68. WhatsApp is 166 177. Same messaging. And email studio@manxradio.com. DEFA's got a really wide mandate, so we'll pick up some questions, lots to talk about today with Clare and Scott. And first of all, Faster Mike, good afternoon, Clare Barber.
Hi Andy, good to see you.
And Scott as well. Welcome, Scott. First time on the show. Good to have you along.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to the phone straight away and we'll go to John, who's with us. Hi, John. You're live with Clare Barber and Scott Gallacher from DEFA.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the call. Just wanted to pick up some questions I had with the Climate Change Act and things that are happening at the moment. So obviously DEFA have a responsibility per the Climate Change Act to protect our biodiversity. And there's a real concern of how things are happening at the moment regarding EIA works for Erie Staying and also the recorded heathland on Kringle Park. So as of today, there's a signage up there that says ground nesting birds are protected. There's 19 species of red listed Isle of Man birds that are in that area. There's also ground nesting birds, which include Schedule 1 birds such as hen harrier, skylark, that are nesting in the area. And there's been permission given with no notice at all to be able to do exploratory EIA works on the pretty much, I'd say 75% of that Kringle Park heathland area, and it's just a concern as to how there's no protection mechanism. And obviously we've experienced willful disturbance of hen harriers literally right on the nest with the EIA works that have been undertaken to date. I've attended some MUA meetings and I was quite alarmed to hear that they've been told that there were no hen harriers in the area, so that is something that is recorded.
Okay, so John, what's your question then to the DEFA people here?
My question is why the protection mechanisms that are supposed to be in place aren't being enacted. So, as I say, the signage there saying keep to the paths, ground nesting birds for the entirety of July, from March through to July, and yet we've given this carte blanche permit for people to just do works over that heathland area.
Okay, all right. Clare Barber.
Hi John, thanks for calling into the show. Certainly, I just want to first of all, obviously I can't comment on any specific application. However, I do acknowledge that the EIA work is something that the DEFA department do comment on in terms of our biodiversity and ecosystems team, and that is the role that we would play. So if there are specifics around this, I really would be happy to talk further. I'm not sure, John. I feel like we may have had an email, and if not, it's someone with very similar points in terms of an email exchange. But we take the responsibility around biodiversity and ecosystems really seriously, actually. And so any areas where we think that they're not being complied with, the team would pick up and would absolutely feedback to ensure that is not the case. Or if there have been things that have happened that shouldn't have, they would then pick up to feedback to those people around what could or couldn't be done. And if there is anything that needs enforcing, then that is a line we have available to us from a regulatory side. So I acknowledge that there is some challenge and some frustration around the fact that DEFA, I suppose, are engaged in some of these pieces in a number of different ways. But I can absolutely assure you that the team take their responsibility very seriously around biodiversity and ecosystems.
Okay, John?
Well, just for as a prime example, and there's photographic evidence of it, a Schedule 1 bird being the hen harrier that's protected, not only did I give a warning that the nest site was being approached closely, the following incident, a couple of days later, I have the photographs of EIA surveys being undertaken exactly where the nest site is, it just shouldn't happen. If we lose those birds and we lose that biodiversity, what do we have left? And the Climate Change Act protects them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And not just the Climate Change Act, also the biodiversity strategy and the work that goes on around that. So there's a number of different ways in which we work, and the Wildlife Act provides protection as well. So actually there really are a number of different routes in for protection for our various species, not just the birds, but also all of the wildlife. And it is really important that we enforce that. So if you haven't been in contact, and because I'm not sure I've had the photos, and I know I'm limited. Sometimes I have to pass these things to officers because I have to preserve my position in regard to the planning application, which I know is frustrating, but that it's important that I make sure I'm away from some of that process. But if those photos haven't been shared, I'd really appreciate if they could be shared into the DEFA team, and we would certainly look to pick up on that.
And what's the email address that anyone would send them to?
If you want to send them to defaminister@gov.im, and then the team will make sure they go directly to the most appropriate part of DEFA.
Okay. Thanks, John. Good to hear from you. It may be worth also restating, Clare Barber, as you said, sometimes you have to step back from decisions because of the planning application. Why is that? What is the process? What's the mechanism which means you have to stand back?
So there's a number of ways that I can end up involved in the planning process. If it's a COMIN application, an application, that COMIN decide to call in, and it's not a DEFA application, then I would be part of that process. But if in any other circumstance, I would then serve as the appeal function. So should there be an appeal, I'm the ultimate person who makes the call as to whether to accept the inspector's recommendation in regards to an appeal. So I need to make sure I can preserve my position as not being conflicted in terms of any decision. And it can be tricky because people send an email in. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious that it's about planning, and so I start reading into it, and then I'm privy to information that may not have been available to the inspector, and it may prejudice my decision, so I would then have to recuse myself. So I'd always say if people do email in anything related to planning, if there is a planning element, if they could put that in the subject line. I know it's tricky, and I know sometimes it just won't work out in terms of a system, but if people can, that's always really helpful because I forward it on to officers and let them check it first, right, just to avoid any conflict.
In the hierarchy of planning, are you at the top of the pyramid?
So it's specifically relating to the appeal function. So the planning officers will make decisions in some cases, and obviously all that's reported online. The planning committee will make decisions in some cases, and then there would be an opportunity for an appeal against those decisions. If the appeal is taken up, then the ultimate decision in the term of an inspector coming over, holding an inquiry, doing a report, making a recommendation, then the decision as to whether to uphold that recommendation vests in me.
Okay. Scott Gallacher, Chief Officer now. Scott, how long have you been in the post?
So it must be coming up to about 9 months now.
Okay. Before that, where were you?
So before that, some people might be picking up a mix of accents. I was born in Scotland, but then grew up most of my life in New Zealand. And throughout my life, particularly growing up, I grew up on farms, worked on farms, and then for most of my working career, I was based in New Zealand, working in a mix of private practice as a lawyer or within government. And in government, I ended up heading up a number of organisations, much like DEFA, which has a focus on the environment, the agriculture, biosecurity, food, and everything else that really is dear to the likes of the Isle of Man.
Lots of people say, I don't know whether this is true, that New Zealand's like the Isle of Man. Is it in any way similar in habitat, in countryside?
I think there's a lot of similarities, but I think what my wife and I are just thoroughly enjoying is actually the vibrancy around the island and the communities. At the end of the day, I think it's the communities and people that make where you are. And my wife and I have just been blown away with the welcome that we've received and just the open nature on this island. We're absolutely loving exploring and getting around and meeting people on the island.
Okay, well, imagine Clare Barber's not here. How's the department? How are things?
Look, what I see every day is about 200 people who are absolutely committed to making a difference for this island. I know that the department touches upon a lot of areas that are sensitive or difficult for people. What I'm committed to do is to make sure the department listens, listens to the people that we're here to serve, and ultimately delivers amazing outcomes for this island. And I want to make sure the department is always learning and listening. And what I've been doing since I've been on the island in late September is trying to get around as much as I can, talking to people, listening, and trying to figure out how the department can be an even stronger proposition for our communities.
Okay, that's Scott Gallacher, Chief Officer at the Environment, Food and Agriculture Department. Here's a message in now. This is 302, and I knew this was going to come up, and you probably did as well, Claire. Please ask the Minister which producers she spoke to who are excited about alternative plans. I'm a small producer, and we're talking about the Food and Drink Festival. This is terrible for me. Will you publish the analysis and feedback which led to the cancellation of the festival? How will the new initiatives compensate, the small producers who rely on the Food and Drink Festival as a mainstay of their events calendar? What measures are going to be put in place to ensure small producers will be guaranteed equal sales from these new initiatives as if they would have achieved at the Food and Drink Festival? I'd also like to know how much it's cost to cancel the festival at such short notice, possible breach contracts, venue hire and contractors. Now, I think Mr. Morehouse has got a question now for this tomorrow as well.
Yeah, so there is an urgent question into Keys tomorrow. And, in terms of publishing letters I've had, as much as I would love to do that because it would actually help, obviously, my case, I just don't think realistically I can commit to publish things that we've received from producers. But I accept that that's challenging. I do accept that. And I also acknowledge, I'm reading some of the feedback on social media. I know that there was some commentary saying we should have a meeting with producers, and actually that's something we committed to in the email that was sent out, and that's absolutely something I want to do. And I think the other thing, I've seen lots of things saying it's not cancelled just this year, it's cancelled forever, and I have no clue where that's come from. This is very much an opportunity to pause and to reset and to provide something alternative this year, to explore how those things work, to see what successes we have, see what does work, what doesn't work, trying to move into some other areas as well and de-risk. And I talked about that when we did an interview with one of your colleagues, Andy. At the minute we're putting a huge amount of resource, both human and financial, into one event, and over the last 2 years we've seen 2 cases where we've almost ended up with no event at all, with all of the money lost. In terms of losses this year, obviously, we're in terms of contracts, we have contracts, and we have made sure that we're working according to those, and we don't foresee there being a loss aside from officer time that we've put into understanding and analysing opportunities. So there has been a lot of consideration around that, around this. There's been a lot of talk. We had feedback from both producers and also from members of the public in terms of going there around the price had gone up. That was something that would have probably had to have gone up further, realistically, around whether we should be trying to do something on the Thursday, Friday evenings before, whether we should try and extend it, whether we should look at other options, whether we need to look at other venues. We did explore whether there was an opportunity to do that in year, and the reality was we just couldn't make those changes in the time frame we had available to us.
So, it was. I'm not saying it was an unmitigated success, but everybody liked the Food and Drink Festival, didn't they? Everybody seemed to have a good time. So, can you give us any idea of what were the concerns? What were the disconnects within the department? Yes,
you say everyone liked it, but I think it would be reasonable to say we did our feedback, and I liked it, Andy, don't get me wrong, and I think there's some opportunity. I'm not sure that the time of year is necessarily right. I think there are perhaps more opportunities. And actually, one of the really big things is that what we want to do is try and change people's buying habits all year round, whereas it felt like we'd got to a position where we were encouraging people to purchase perhaps for one weekend of the year without that ongoing commitment. And I think it needs to be something that really tries to change buyers' habits, and we're seeing some of the impact already from people who are talking to us about the change from ShopRite to Tesco, and there are some changes, there are some impacts for some people in that regard, and we understand that, so we really need to make sure we're responding to that. So I accept that, as with everything, I'm sure we could have done things differently. We could have maybe done the communication better, and I absolutely take that on board, and I apologise for anyone who is disappointed, I suppose, in the way that we've handled this. But I really do want to have that discussion and ongoing engagement with some of the people perhaps we haven't reached, whose voices we're now hearing. Because I think there are some real opportunities in this, especially working closer with DFE.
Okay, Julian, hi, you're live with Scott and Claire from DEFA. Hi, Julian.
Hi, Andy, and hello to your guests.
Hi, Julian. How are you doing?
Hiya. I was listening to Nina Cooper from Chocolate Man earlier today, and she was saying that local producers feel they are being stamped on by your department. She also said your department doesn't value local producers, and Nina echoes many people that I've spoken to recently. So I've got a few questions for you, Claire. Whose idea was it exactly to stop the Food and Drink Festival?
So, I mean, it was a conversation that we had within DEFA, and I think there was a number of bits of feeding in with that. Ultimately, the decision was taken through our policy and strategy meeting with a paper that was presented that we then made a call to move to an alternate model.
Are the buyers that you refer to meeting the producers, are they local or are they from across?
So a mixture. So, we haven't set anything in stone, but we definitely feel in conversation with DFE that there are opportunities both locally, and we know that we have people, buyers locally who want more product, and also across. We know that there are opportunities across, and we know that that will work for some businesses, and we know it may not work for others. So again, it's that one size doesn't fit all.
Well, I noticed that the Food and Drink website was saying that there was a 50% increase in 2022 for the take on the Food and Drink show at £325,000. And obviously, Nina Cooper was talking about 500 bags of chocolates, 100 kilos of chocolate being used, etc., etc. What is your business case for stopping the Food and Drink show exactly, and for whose benefit will it be? I assume this has got nothing to do with Tesco's, is it?
No, certainly nothing to do with Tesco's, Julian. As I say, it really is about us trying to provide something that covers off more producers in the longer run, but also a year-round a year-round offering and regional offerings. I think we reflected we really are at the minute putting all our eggs in one basket, and actually we felt there was something better we can do. If the overwhelming feedback becomes that actually people want to just have one single event in year, then that's something that we can either look at doing later this year or reinstate next year if that's what people think is the absolute best value for money. I genuinely have some nervousness about that being a commitment that's the best way to do this, because I honestly, having seen the last 2 years where we so nearly lost both events, I think it's a massive risk.
Finally then, your resources are also being paid £40,000 a year for a farm carbon engagement officer. Is that reasonable use of 40 grand a year from your department? Also, finally, are you in the position that you could do a U-turn on this very quickly and have this food show? And if not, do you think your current job role would be tenable anymore?
So in terms of the farm carbon officer, I mean, that's something very different, funded separately, and I think we talked about that at length actually in a question in Parliament. So that's come from the Climate Change Fund, very specifically to implement the farm carbon toolkits. That's a specific project, and it's a limited term appointment. So I couldn't take money from climate change to fund the food festival because it wouldn't achieve reduction in emissions. So there are specific terms of reference, I suppose it would be important to point out around how I spend money. And in terms of, could we do a U-turn? I think realistically at this point that's not something that can be done. But what I would say is there are still things that we're working on that we haven't announced yet that will fill some of these spaces. And I would really encourage producers to bear with us.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, good to hear from you. I'm going to go to George now, who's with us. Hi, George. You're live on Mannin Line.
Hello.
Hi, George.
Hello, Claire. Hello, Scott. Something I wanted to bring up was the cost of the boat for live exports of livestock of the thing. I want to know why it's costing 4 times the amount here than it's costing to bring from Scotland to Northern Ireland.
Hi, George. I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to either look at the evidence we submitted to the Tynwald Committee around the steam packet or listen into the evidence that both myself and Scott gave to that committee. It is something that we've had raised with us from a number of areas, and DEFA then made sure that information was fed in. I know that the MNFU also put a submission in to that committee, and that's being considered. And I also welcome, obviously, the commitment by the Chief Minister to look into that actually in advance of the committee reporting based on some of the evidence put in by the different departments.
Okay, George?
Yes, it's just that we can't understand why there's such a discrepancy and why nothing has ever been done about the difference in the price and why we're at such a disadvantage with live exports.
As I say, I'm happy if you want to leave your email address. We could send across perhaps our submission, which might give a little bit more insight into where we're coming from as DEFA with that regard.
Okay.
I can't comment on previous parliaments.
All right. Okay. Well, George, we've got your details, and we'll get Clare Barber to. If we can get your email address, we'll get that over to you as well. Scott, I just wanted to ask you, are there any parallels with problems and issues that are on the Isle of Man with things that you came across in New Zealand at all? In terms of food production, security and things like that, and the cost as well?
Look, I think a lot of the issues that I see every day on the island, there are some similarities, but again, what I'm focused upon is making sure we come up with solutions and outcomes that best suit the Isle of Man. So whilst on New Zealand, similar sort of issues in terms of cost of production, some of the pressures that the agricultural sector's under, some of the pressures and sensitivity around biosecurity, again, I really want to make sure that we are focused on Isle of Man solutions that actually deliver something for the Isle of Man. And just picking up something the Minister was talking upon in terms of the carbon audit toolkit, that was something really important that we wanted to ensure by rolling that out, and it was responding to the Farmers Union over the last 6 or 12 months, but it was actually making sure that on the Isle of Man we have data that is relevant to the Isle of Man. We don't want to use a methodology or data from across or any other jurisdiction. We need to make sure we are absolutely rich in data for the Isle of Man, because that's going to make a difference for us.
Okay, here we are live today, and lots of messages coming in, which I'll get to. We need to... still more on this Food and Drink Festival is not going away. Why was it cancelled at the last minute? This is Ali who's just asking as well. I mean, is it fair to say, Clare Barber, that is this about cost? Is it about money in the end?
No, I mean certainly that there is one element. It is cost. I also genuinely think we can do something better. And as I say, that's from feedback I've received certainly over the years, but also that piece around, we really are putting a huge amount of the budget that we spend on food and drink into one basket. And, having seen 2 years where we're very vulnerable in that regard, one I appreciate was the Queen dying, unlikely to be repeated. But, there are significant things that can change that suddenly leave you where you've put all of your resource and all your money into one event on one date. And if that goes, things or the weather doesn't play, you really are, and last year we saw with the weather, actually it really, the outside area was really challenging for people to go through. We put matting down. We did what we could in the circumstances. But I feel that really we need a different venue. That's a very strong feeling I have. I think we should be looking at somewhere indoors, somewhere that can provide the space to do something really exciting, and perhaps do that on a regional basis, actually take the Food and Drink Festival to people. I think there are better things we can do. So, it's not a case of just saying we're not doing this, not ever. The budget is there. We have money. We've obviously been successful in attracting sponsorship as well in the past. But I honestly believe we can do better.
Okay. 602 message comes in. You'll like this one, Clare. Claire's got a tough job managing that department. She's doing a grand job. And here's another one from Crystal on 775. Has the Isle of Man been sold down the river with Tesco? Do you think Tesco is the thin end of the wedge for producers on the Isle of Man and that they're on a loser?
I mean, I have to say, all the conversations that we're having with Tesco, they want more local produce. They really do. However, I'm not going to pretend that isn't without some challenges, and whether that be because for producers providing and supplying to a big organisation like Tesco, they have to be able to provide consistency. Some of the agreements they perhaps had with ShopRite, won't work in terms of the flexibility. Tesco's have got a very different requirement, but Tesco's absolutely have worked with us. They've taken people on board. And actually they're asking for more. They're saying we want people in some different areas, we want some other products. But it does present a challenge, and that's why as DEFA it's absolutely right that we keep those conversations with Tesco strong. It's absolutely right that we keep monitoring and we make sure that where we have a situation that essentially is a monopoly that's taken a step further than ShopRite, given that ShopRite also had a significant market share, I think it's really important that we monitor that and we make sure that there isn't any advantage taken. But that's just the same as we would do with any other retail proposition, And it's also we're not here just to support Tesco's, and we're not here just to support ShopRite or just Robinsons. We're here to support all of these businesses. And actually, what makes it very much a community feel is having a number of different shops we can pick from. But also, and something we're really focused on is making sure that the Manx Food and Drink can get into those local spaces, either through the established retailers that are already there, or also through other opportunities that we can create and support. And within DEFA we've provided support to the Douglas Foodies Market on North Quay. I think that's really important. Isle of Man Farmers Market, we've worked with them for many years, and they're providing some of that. I think it's really important we look at how can we bolster that to make it, we often hear people say, well, I would buy local, but Tesco's deliver to the door, Co-op deliver to the door now. It's really important that we promote the fact Robinsons deliver to the door as well. Actually, there's a number of different routes people can go, and all of the retailers, I think, are listening and trying to bring the product to people. We also need to make sure, though, that we support, because for some people, it's just not viable to go into those big companies, and they need a way to get to the consumer. And for me, whether we do that, if people want just one weekend a year, or whether we look at how we can provide better support actually year round to make it easier for people to make the decision to shop local and buy local produce, I think that's really important.
One big issue, of course, with most shoppers is price, and purchasing stuff grown, made on the Isle of Man is often more expensive. And it is a fundamental question. How would you say to somebody who's watching the pennies, you must buy local?
I think it can be more expensive. I don't think it's always more expensive, actually. And of
True.
course, the more people you cut out in the middle, the better price you get when you're selling. So actually being able to sell directly to the consumer, I think, there's some real benefits, especially for some of those really small businesses that just don't have the economies of scale. We've got some great farm shops, but of course, as you say, it's trying to link people together. But in terms of asking people to shop local, and I think I've said this on the show before, and I will absolutely say it again. I think I would say to people, if you can just make one change in your basket, I think that's brilliant. Do you know what? If you're not in a position to be able to do that, that's absolutely fine as well. But for the people who can afford to make the changes, I really would encourage them to. Whether that be going down to your local butchers and buying local meat, whether that be buying from the dairy, the creamery have got some brilliant products around, whether that be buying local vegetables, and we've got a number of different organisations now selling that. We've got two local bakeries providing a wealth of turning a wealth of ingredients into some brilliant products. We really have got a host of different organisers, whether it be from chocolates to cakes to pies. There's so much available on the island, isn't there? And then that's without even going into our seafood, and our shellfish business and local fish. There really is a richness of produce. And I suppose the one thing I would say is I think it's for us all to reflect actually on how our diets sit, because I spent some time talking to a Norwegian chef recently, and they're at 50% actually self-sufficiency, while we're sitting at under 10% in terms of self-sufficiency. And a lot of that was because actually they're still eating fish, vegetables, potatoes. They're eating what they can grow. And that's, I think, a significant difference for where we have found ourselves actually on the island, where a lot of people's diets aren't related to the things that we can naturally grow here on the island. So sometimes it's a case actually of just looking, could you swap out pasta for local potatoes? Could you look at, rather than having chicken, perhaps have pork? We've got local pork, but we're not producing chickens locally. So sometimes it's just looking at other alternatives where you can get local produce for something that at the minute has to be imported because we just simply don't have a market.
OK, you want to get in touch with DEFA today. Clare Barber, MHK, is in the Minister. Scott Gallacher is the Chief Officer, and we're on till 1 today.
Hello, this is Doug Farragher. In conjunction with Manx Radio, I'd like to invite you to join us and learn something about our native Gaelic tongue, the language of man.
Spectrum Windows. If your house needs a new look and your windows letting rain, keep those cold breezes out and make it look like new again. Spectrum Windows, Spectrum Windows. Quality through and through. Great work guaranteed to you. Spectrum Windows, Spectrum Windows. Spectrum Windows.
Housing, benefits or employment issues, faulty goods, bad workmanship, financial problems and relationship breakdowns. We all run into difficulties in life, and it can feel like there's no one who can help you sort them out. But at Manx Citizens Advice Service, we can help. As an independent charity, we offer free, confidential support covering all sorts of areas. You don't need an appointment. Just call in at Promenade Church, Loch Promenade, Douglas, or call 366 338. Open Tuesdays from 12:30 till 3 and Fridays 10 till 12:30. Manx Citizens Advice Service. Your advice service.
Out and about this summer, EVF service stations have everything you need to make the most of it. Hot and cold food, chilled wine and beers, barbecue essentials and more. You can even pick up your lottery tickets at our stations across the island. Fill up, fuel up with Ellen Vannin Fuels. Visit us at evf.co.im. Stocks and offers may vary between locations.
This evening, the first in a series of 5 programmes hearing those you've heard over 60 years of Manx Radio. This evening, the Mannin Line from the 90s.
One fella took his helmet off, took his gloves off, was going to set about me. Could I stop him jumping the lights?
Wait a minute, David. Just give me a chance to finish.
From 6 p.m. Available as a podcast afterwards at manxradio.com.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster Mai, good afternoon. I just want to also draw your attention to the fact that it is Monday. Nothing special there. We get one of those every week. But also it is one of the days when we broadcast stuff from the archive. And today, after Mannin Line, you'll hear the voice of an absolute powerhouse in politics in the 1960s through till the 1980s. Percy Ratcliffe was a member of Ledgeco and the Isle of Man, chairman of Exco as well. He was an MHK from 1963, farmer, horseman. He was one of the people instrumental in setting up riding for the disabled on the Isle of Man. So we'll be hearing from Percy Ratcliffe when Mannin Line finishes today. And Juan's on now. Hi, Juan. You're live with DEFA.
Afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Claire. Afternoon, Scott.
Hi, Juan.
Afternoon.
Hi. Scott, just a quick one there. Interested in listening to your thing from New Zealand there, and obviously I see you're having a lot of problems with tribal stuff down there in the last few years, and you might be having the same problems here in the next couple of years, the way things are going with government. You mentioned listening to the people. I'm going to revert back to Claire now. Claire, we're talking about listening to the people there, as Scott said. Very interested myself. I've been tied up with the Paul Burgess thing for Thursday and Friday. Very interested that no one much from MHKs wanted to come and listen to what Paul had to say about climate and wind turbines. So going back to talking to the people and listening to them, on that point there, one MHK and one MLC. Very interesting, considering that, this comes a little bit under your remit. Going on to the changes in Europe at the moment, you see a lot of things that's happening there and repercussions because of the pressures that government are putting on farmers. And you can see now the breakdown of ESGs happening around the place. Government's been taken over, farming people actually protecting what they've got. And again, the spiel that you just gave before about buying local, totally agree, 150%. Been saying that on this programme for a while. But I'm failing to see the disconnect here with government in helping this along. This food show that you've just cancelled last minute, and I'm listening to all the points that you've made about it, this was a destination point for people. This was a place for people to go to interact with the local people and see the food that's getting sold. You mentioned about weather. That's fine. Maybe it is the wrong venue. Probably is. You've got a big grandstand there with hard standing on. Why didn't you just switch it to that? Why have you cancelled it on the last minutes? And why are now people upset with the way the government are handling this? I just feel a total disconnect with this government, with everything at the moment that you're doing, a total disconnect, and a lot of people are. And I think a lot of people are waiting for the next election, which will tell how disconnected this government is with the people.
Yeah, so I mean, just starting with the Paul Burgess event, I think I did actually respond saying I wasn't able to attend that. I do believe it's been filmed, and certainly once it is, I will catch up with that, as I do often with things I can't attend. Having kids sometimes means evenings I'm more likely to be seen ferrying people to and from hockey, so it really does depend if I haven't had enough notice. So I apologise. I wasn't able to attend that. I can't comment on other people, but yeah, it certainly wasn't possible to pop that into my diary. In terms of the the listening, I think I've already commented actually during this this session, that if that's what people want, that they think that the event should just carry on exactly as it was, then that's fine. We can absolutely look to do that from next year. I think realistically this year that's not going to be possible. But we could do something later in the year, and we have got a number of things already sort of in the pipeline for earlier on. So there are things that we're not in a position yet to announce, I suppose, and I hope that some of those will serve to show people exactly what we're trying to achieve. But I take your point. I think it's always important to listen, and that's absolutely why we're here. I think if we weren't open to listening, I'd just say to Andy, actually not really for us, but we always turn up, and we always do take absolutely the feedback on board. And I absolutely hope that what we see in future is a whole calendar of events throughout the year that really celebrate our food and drink, because I think, as you say, there are some brilliant things there.
So you'd like to see smaller and more?
Yeah, but possibly with a flagship event. I'm absolutely not ruling that out at all. I think there's absolutely an opportunity for that.
One for the north, one for the south, one for the west?
Well, quite possibly, and we've already had some interest from some of the commissioners in partnering, in that. Actually, I suppose it's one of the things that's happened by us, making this announcement, is suddenly there's lots of people saying, actually, well, we'd love to do something, and we never really thought that was a possibility. So I'm hoping to see a number of events that DEFA partner with and we can support through, which I think will be really positive. So it's absolutely not a case of us not listening. I think it's clear that there's a greater strength of feeling towards that particular event, but I suppose at the minute also people haven't seen the other things that will be possible. Right. So.
Okay. All right. Thanks, June. Sorry.
Andy, just before you go, just a quick one. A lot of this has been driven, when we know this has been driven by net zero, ESGs, and again, as Julian just mentioned, the Farm Carbon Engagement Officer. This has all been driven by higher sources. And this is going to affect our farming in the future if you keep going down this avenue. I talked on here with the last time we were on, Claire, about we were talking about costs of fertilisation and seaweed and etc. And you said to me that wasn't usable. I'm going to refer back quickly to a Manx Radio article recently, Hidden Gem of Seaweed, Should We Pay More Attention to It? From Vincent Dozolelm, from Senior Advisor to the UN, Director of Food Programming at Lloyd's Global Seaweed Coalition. Why isn't this stuff getting looked at? I've mentioned this several times on this programme, and then this article comes out. It bemuses me why we hear this spiel about, it can be used, it can't be used, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and nothing gets done.
Okay, so can seaweed be used, Clare Barber?
So I'm not aware. I'm not going to commit to doing something that I'm just not aware of. I'm more than happy. I can't recall seeing the article, so if you want to ping it over, I'd be more than happy to have a look at it and get in touch with the people involved. Okay. But certainly, I'm aware that there have been a number of people who've looked at the viability of seaweed, and certainly there's a huge natural resource there. And I would have thought if there was an option, people would have explored that probably already.
Okay, and just to pick up on what Julian was talking about, because in Europe there are some militant farmers. We've seen the pictures of the farmers in Holland and in Paris and what have you. And you and I have talked many times about the fact that it is difficult to piece together a living in agriculture on the Isle of Man. What's the mood of the farmers?
So I think it's very clear that farming is challenging, and the challenges have prevailed for a longer period of time, I think, than we would have expected or hoped. But equally, we know that the meat plant's paying a good price. Red meat certainly seeing a really good price both at the meat plant and for those who've chosen to export. I think we recognise there are some challenges across the dairy sector. That's the milk prices have paid to the farmers have dipped, and that is definitely a challenge and something that we're wanting to look at. And equally, arable farming has struggled because of the weather changes, and that's going to be something I suspect we're going to see more and more of. So there are a number of things that are going to be within our control. There are going to be some things that possibly will be outside of our control. There's a new director now of agriculture and food. I think since we last spoke, actually, Andy, what we've done is we've actually separated agriculture and food out to put someone in just in charge of that area, recognising really the challenges that exist. Because previously the one director had a huge portfolio covering all of the forestry, all of our rental properties across the whole of DEFA, all of our land, our glens, our plantations, and agriculture and food, as well as the wildlife park, the sawmill, and a plethora of other things. So we've actually taken that post, we've done an internal rejig to allow a director of agriculture and food, and Chris Neal is the person in that post, and is really passionate about looking how we can bring new faces into agriculture, make it something appealing, make sure we're not losing people from agriculture. And we know that there is a risk around that at the minute, and we know that young people, even those who are brought up through farming families, are having to make choices where they move away from the farming tradition. So there is a huge pressure in this area, and we recognise and are looking at how we can address that. Okay, message in, this is a WhatsApper in. The local butchers are finding it harder to support the meat plant. There are suppliers in the UK queuing to provide meat to the Isle of Man. How are we going to keep the supply local? And on that subject, Keith is live with us. Hi, Keith. You're live on Mannin Line.
Thank you. Keith Carouche. My daughter Anna is a sheep farmer at Mackled, and we're keen to know that we know that Tesco is keen to buy Manx, and they need 40 carcasses of beef per week in their stores in the Isle of Man. I'd like to know what Isle of Man meats have got contracts in place with Tesco, and what is the current weekly volume.
Hi, Keith, and thanks for getting in touch. I think it's a great opportunity actually to talk about some of the challenges, I suppose, that a transition from ShopRite to Tesco brings. So in terms of the carcasses, the meat plant is absolutely ready and able to provide them. But Tesco don't want carcasses. What they need, obviously, is boxed and retail processed meat. And that's a very different operation in terms of the meat plant. They were previously doing that on a very small scale, just providing one store, really. And obviously, to suddenly scale up and be able to provide 10 stores, that's a complete change of operation. So there's a significant amount of work at the minute going on at the meat plant in terms of us looking at realistically how we can do that, what investment we would need in terms of our infrastructure, how many extra people we would need, and then the cost associated. And then does that work out? How's best to do that? Or are we better actually working with a partner to deliver some of that retail packaged meat? So there is a lot of work in this area. I think I'd love to be able to just say we can just press a switch and suddenly we'll times by 10 the amount we put into minced and diced, for example, but it's just realistic, not that simple.
I just wonder, the ShopRite have laid off, or Tesco have laid off, all the butchers that worked previously for ShopRite, but there doesn't seem to be any opportunity for them with Isle of Man meats, and that's a surprise. Can you throw light on that?
Yes, it's not specifically to do with people, it's to do with actual processing. So when we're doing minced, for example, it's machinery, it's how much we can physically process through the machines we have. And we simply have, the kit that was invested in at the time was done on the basis of providing to one shop. And we can't scale that up without investing significantly in the capital infrastructure, and that's a big cost. And we need to understand also, is that going to, what does that bring back from the meat plant in terms of what cost to provide, I suppose. And I know that's tricky because everyone wants to see meat on the shelves of all of our stores, and I'm absolutely there with everyone, but I'm not, I suppose what I'm saying, Keith, is it's not necessarily the best way for the meat plant to do the processing.
What would you like to see happen, Keith?
Well, I'd like to see the meat plant either process and deliver these goods to the shelf, but I appreciate that Tesco have 61 lines of beef to process, so we're really talking about mince and stew, which can easily be processed here, and I think that Isle of Man meats are slow off the mark. It's now 9 months since Tesco appeared, and I'm just at a loss as to why we've got this weekly cost of exporting cattle, and it's not getting consumed in the Isle of Man. So I think it's a scandalous situation, really, that they haven't been able to set up a provision for Tesco.
So I mean, I know you call it easy, Keith, and I'd love you to. I don't know whether you applied to join the board recently, but I mean, I can confidently tell you we've spent many hours poring over the figures and the details and how scaling up actually could work in practice. And easy isn't the word I would use.
But they're being secretly kept. No one is telling the farmers where you're up to. Meanwhile, you spend a fortune, and it's well known that the meat plant is trading at a very severe loss. But all this meat is being exported off the Isle of Man and not put on the shelf at Tesco.
Okay, all right, Keith, we appreciate that. Thanks for that, Keith. I just need to get one more question in, and this is regarding the Tree Preservation Act, which I think comes under your aegis, doesn't it? And this, you probably know this because Michael's written to you already. I have to maintain a monkey puzzle tree that's lifting my slabs, damaging my drive, and the tree roots are in my house, and the Tree Preservation Act protects this tree. I'm suffering and get no help with this. The insurance won't pay out for the damage that it's causing me. So why is that? Why is the Tree Preservation Act stopping that?
So obviously I can't comment on the insurance side. That would be obviously a contract between them and Michael. And I have spoken with Michael. We've met up and had a meeting. And obviously he has written to me, as he alludes. The Tree Preservation Act seeks to say, well, actually where a tree doesn't need to be removed, it shouldn't be removed. And there's a process that can be gone through, and our officers will review whether a tree should be permitted to be removed. Now, I'm led to believe that there is an opportunity. I'm not sure whether Michael has yet, or certainly there was talk of putting an application in to see whether that tree would be allowed to be permitted for felling. But the reality is that within your own curtilage of your property, you have a responsibility to manage trees, and that we acknowledge that can come at a cost. But the reality is government just aren't in a position to do that for everyone, because I would question where would we draw the line. So we absolutely go out and focus on tree safety across the public estate. The roads fall within DOI. The glens and plantations are very much our focus, but that has to be where we channel our money in terms of managing trees. But there is always an option to submit an application, and if Michael hasn't yet done so, I would encourage him to.
Okay, thanks for being with us today. Good to hear from you. Thanks to Scott Gallacher. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, thank you.
Good to hear from you today. And also Clare Barber. It's not the last time you'll hear Clare. We're doing a Mannin Line early morning special on Tynwald Day, and she's agreed to be with us at the Royal Manx Agricultural Show as well. Thanks, Clare.
Thanks, Andy. We'll see you again soon.
Good to hear from you. And next week, by the way, Deborah Heather from Visit Isle of Man and Sarah Maltby will be on Mannin Line next Tuesday, talking about what used to be called tourism. Thanks to Chris Quirk on the phones today. Back tomorrow with an open line.
WINT
60 years serving you